At midnight, Christopher Columbus lands in the Bahamas, triggering first Spain, then other European powers to claim and settle land in the Americas over the course of the next 3 centuries. At 3:18 a.m., the Spanish found the first permanent settlement on the North American continent at St. Augustine. At 4:26 a.m., the English colony of Roanoke is found abandoned. At 5:12 a.m., the English found Jamestown, their first successful colony in North America. At 5:47 a.m., the Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower land at Plymouth and set up a colony there. At 7:46 a.m., the English purchased New Amsterdam from the Dutch, renaming it New York. At 10:35 a.m., William Penn founds a colony along the Delaware and Susquehanna rivers called Sylvania, later renamed Pennsylvania. It becomes a beacon of religious and racial tolerance. At 12:15 p.m., the British defeat the French in the French and Indian War, securing territory from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. King George III issues the Proclamation of 1763, prohibiting the American colonists from settling beyond the Appalachian Mountains. At 12:20 p.m., the British enact the Stamp Act, a tax on paper. Many colonists are furious that they are being forced to pay a tax without having any say over it, and riots break out across the colonies. At 12:34 p.m., British soldiers shoot into a crowd of Bostonians, killing 5 and causing outrage throughout the colonies. At 12:42 p.m., Bostonian patriots board 3 ships carrying tea in Boston Harbor and dump 342 chests of tea overboard in protest of the Tea Act. At 12:45 p.m., the British respond to the Boston Tea Party with the Intolerable Acts. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies meet for the first time in Philadelphia in the First Continental Congress and call for a mobilization of the militia. At 12:48 p.m., Massachusetts militiamen engage British forces at Lexington and Concord, sparking the Revolutionary War. At 12:51 p.m., after being forced out of Boston, the British deal a decisive defeat against Washington's Continental Army at New York, causing Washington to retreat across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. Washington then launches surprise attacks against the British and their allies at Trenton and Princeton. At 12:54 p.m., the Continentals camp in brutal conditions at Valley Forge, while Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold decisively defeat a British force at Saratoga in New York. At 1:05 p.m., the Continentals and the French defeat the British at Yorktown. At 1:10 p.m., the Treaty of Paris ends the Revolutionary War. At 1:21 p.m., delegates from the states meet in Philadelphia and write a constitution. At 1:32 p.m., the Bill of Rights is added to the Constitution. At 2:05 p.m., the U.S. purchases Louisiana from the French, doubling its territory. Lewis and Clark embark on an expedition to explore the West. At 2:29 p.m., the War of 1812 begins. At 2:34 p.m., the British burned the White House and unsuccessfully besieged Fort McHenry, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. The war technically ends with the Treaty of Ghent. At 2:37 p.m., Andrew Jackson defeats the British at New Orleans. At 2:51 p.m., the Missouri Compromise admits Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, and prohibits new slave states north of the 36th parallel. At 3:18 p.m., Congress passes the Indian Removal Act, ordering all Indian tribes east of the Mississippi River to move to designated Indian territory in modern Oklahoma. At 2:40 p.m., the Cherokee are forced to march the Trail of Tears. At 3:02 p.m., The Mexican-American War begins with a confrontation on the Rio Grande River. The war turns out to be extremely one-sided, as the US wins every battle. At 4:07 p.m., the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ends the Mexican-American War and gives the US a third of Mexico's territory. Gold is found in the newly acquired California and triggers a massive gold rush. At 4:12 p.m., the Compromise of 1850 admits California as a free state and legally enforces the Fugitive Slave Act. At 4:23 p.m., the KANSAS-NEBRASKA Act, which allows people in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves if they are to be admitted as free or slave states, triggers violence between pro- and anti-slavery settlers in Kansas, known as Bleeding Kansas. At 4:42 p.m., 11 southern states secede upon the election of President Abraham Lincoln, sparking the Civil War when Confederate troops opened fire on Fort Sumter. At 4:45 p.m., Ulysses S. Grant repels a massive surprise attack at Shiloh. Robert E. Lee invades Maryland but is turned back at Antietam after the single bloodiest day in American history. At 4:48 p.m., Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, ceremonially freeing the slaves in Confederate-held territory. After Lee wins a decisive victory at Chancellorsville, he invades the Union again, but is himself decisively defeated at Gettysburg in the bloodiest battle in American history. Lincoln gives the Gettysburg Address. Grant besieges and captures Vicksburg and secures the Mississippi River. At 4:51 p.m., William Tecumseh Sherman besieges and takes Atlanta, then marches to the sea, carving a great path of destruction. Grant advances towards Richmond and takes many casualties and besieges Petersburg. At 4:54 p.m., Grant captures Petersburg and Richmond. Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse. Lincoln is assassinated. The 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery, is ratified. At 6:24 p.m., the U.S. wins the Spanish-American War during an imperialist spree. At 7:16 p.m., the U.S. joins World War I, tipping the scales in the Allies' favor. At 7:19 p.m., the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I. At 7:22 p.m., the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing women's suffrage, is ratified. At 7:46 p.m., the stock market crashes, causing millions of Americans to lose their savings and beginning the Great Depression. At 8:19 p.m., Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, dragging the U.S. into World War II. At 8:22 p.m., the U.S. defeats the Japanese at Midway. The Japanese will never recover. The Americans wage a bloody campaign on and around Guadalcanal. The Americans and British land in northwest Africa and begin to squeeze the Germans out of North Africa. At 8:25 p.m., the Allies force Germany out of North Africa after a bloody campaign. They then invade Sicily and Italy, beginning long bloody campaigns there. At 8:28 p.m., the Allies invade Normandy and Provence and push the Germans back from the west. The Americans land on Saipan and crushes the Japanese fleet at Leyte Gulf, beginning the firebombing of Japan and the liberation of the Philippines. The Germans launch a counteroffensive in the Ardennes, but are defeated. At 8:31 p.m., Germany surrenders. The U.S. lands on Iwo Jima and Okinawa in fierce, bloody engagements. The U.S. drops the only atomic bombs ever to be used in warfare on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing tens of thousands of deaths. Japan surrenders. Between 8:45 and 8:53 p.m., the indecisive Korean War is fought on the Korean Peninsula. At 8:56 p.m., Brown v. Board of Education officially makes school segregation illegal. At 8:59 p.m., Rosa Parks is arrested for not giving up her bus seat to a white man, triggering the Montgomery bus boycott. At 9:15 p.m., Alan Shepard becomes the first American man in space. At 9:18 p.m., the Cuban Missile Crisis threatens to destroy the world with nuclear war. At 9:21 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his I Have a Dream speech. At 9:24 p.m., the Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing racial, ethnic, religious, and sexual discrimination, is passed. Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing President Lyndon B. Johnson to send troops to intervene in Vietnam, an ultimately costly and fruitless affair, dominated by U.S. failures to suppress the North Vietnamese and widespread atrocities. At 9:38 p.m., Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin of Apollo 11 become the first humans to land on the moon. At 9:46 p.m., the Watergate scandal damages President Richard Nixon's reputation and eventually forces him out of office. At 9:49 p.m., the last U.S. troops leave Vietnam. At 10:35 p.m., a U.S.-led coalition invades Iraq in response to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. At 11:05 p.m., Al-Qaeda terrorists hijack and crash commercial jets into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania, provoking universal outrage. The U.S. invades Afghanistan in response, and subsequently, controversially, occupies the country. At 11:13 p.m., the U.S. and UK invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein's regime, but then face insurrections during the subsequent controversial occupation. At 11:35 p.m., Osama bin Laden is killed during a Navy SEAL raid at a complex in Pakistan. 11:43 p.m., Michael Brown is shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, sparking nationwide protests. At 11:59 p.m., the new disease, COVID-19, makes its way into the U.S. in the beginning stages of a pandemic. George Floyd is killed by a police officer and sparks worldwide outrage and protests. The U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan, allowing extremists to take back control of the country.